Okay, can you hear me now? Alright. Figure out how to put this on me. Alright, good morning. So glad to be here this morning with y'all and just have the opportunity to be able to do Bible class and lead while I'm here. I am accompanied by my classmate and good friend Brandon Aguilar. We come from Southwest. We just started our second year there. So this morning I'm actually going to be in the book of Isaiah, and more specifically Isaiah chapter 6. Now Isaiah was a very interesting man. You go through and you look at it, and he's actually nicknamed the Messianic prophet because of the prophecies that he tells of the life and death of Jesus Christ. Three major chapters that are key in the book of Isaiah are 6, 7, and 53. 6 tells of Isaiah's authorship and his calling from the Lord. Chapter 7 tells about the miraculous virgin birth of Jesus Christ, while chapter 53 holds and kind of gives the title of, as Jesus as the suffering servant. And this morning I will be in chapter 6, and we'll look at that authority that Isaiah is given. Now, for chapter 6, there's I kind of have a basic outline here of just kind of what all is kind of headlined. Verses 1 through 4 I have as the prophet's vision. Verses 5 through 7, the prophet's cleansing. And verses 8 through 12, the prophet's commission. And then 13, we'll see, just kind of falls in there. But to start it out this morning, we'll look at the first point, the prophet's vision, verses 1 through 4. Does anybody want to read this morning?
Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my love, touching his vineyard. A well-beloved
Isaiah chapter 6?
Oh, 6. I'm sorry. I had 5.
You're okay.
All right, I'll start over.
Yes, sir.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon his throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the Syrians. Each one had 6 wings. With wings he covered his face, and with wings he covered his feet, and with wings he did fly. And one cried unto another, and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips, for mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts.
Thank you, sir. All right. So, as we get here into this 6th chapter, we kind of see a little intro and background to it. There in the first part of verse 1, it says that the year that King Uzziah died. Now, if we go and we turn into 2 Kings chapter 15, verses 1 through 7, there, well, actually, he's called Uzziah, but it's kind of a brief overview of King Uzziah's reign, and we know if we do some studying that Azariah means Yahweh has helped, and Uzziah means Yahweh is my strength. Just kind of a little bit of a name change there and what those names mean. But like I said, if we go over his reign in Judah, he started in the 27th year of Jeroboam's reign, which is about 767 BC. He did what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, all except that one thing, and that's removing the high places. And so thus, through this, he was struck with leprosy because of his disobedience. And that was around about 742 BC, whenever he was taken out and relieved of his duties as king. And then we see that he died in 2 Chronicles 26:20, kind of gives us a timestamp of that. And so that was 739 BC. So that's whenever we pick up here in Isaiah chapter 6. But we see, Isaiah kind of start, and he tells of this vision that he has, and he tells of him first sitting on the throne. Now, we might not think this is a big thing, but we see that, as the kings, they come and go, as they die off or as they get replaced, we see that Isaiah points this out. He's sitting up there on his throne. Now, this is just an establishment of authority, but also saying that that we need to recognize his authority and his control, and that even though all these kings come and go, he lasts forever. He's there and he reigns forever. As we read on, and he says that his robe filled the temple. Now, some scholars are actually split up on this, because some scholars say that this is to show just how great and mighty he is, just for the train of his robe to fill the temple. That just shows how great and mighty he is. Because in old times, of course, whenever you had the Ark of the Covenant and everything, God's glory was evident in between the two cherubims there. And so thus, people would conclude and people would think that, God's not very big. He's just pretty small if he can fit between those two cherubims. And so some scholars believe that this is just to kind of show his mightiness and how great he is. Now other scholars say that this is to show where the Lord touches the earth. The Lord can be seen through all his creation, and we know that. But the temple, the holy place, it wasn't a symbol for anything here, but it was literally the temple, and that's where where God is most evident in these times. We can see that if we cross-reference 1 Corinthians 3:16 as the temple being his dwelling place. As we move along into verse 2, above it stood seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, with 2 he flew. Now this one was mind-boggling whenever I was studying it and going over it, because every 2 or 3 words can be pulled out a different definition or a different meaning or what it's talking about here. So as you start out in verse 2, above him. Now above him, this is the position of a servant waiting on the master to tell him to do something. This is excuse me. This was the posture of a servant waiting on his master. He was above him. He was waiting on him to call. Though he was lowly in spirit and he put himself under him, but his posture physically was above him. Now we see these seraphim. Now these seraphim were actually angelic beings, but their name literally means burning ones, or to burn. But this is not actual fire that they're made of. This is kind of figurative language talking about their zeal that they had to be, to be there, to be above the Lord, waiting on to serve Him. And these 6 wings. With 6 wings, 2 covered His face, 2 covered His feet, and with 2 He flew. Excuse me. Now, these 2 that covered His face, these can, it can be, well, all 6 wings really are taken a little bit differently by different commentators, depending on where you go or who you look at. But ultimately, these 2 that covered their face, this kind of showed that this was possible, that it was showing a humility before God. Thank you, sir. Thank you. These 2 that covered their face, it was possible that, this was them showing humility before God. Who deserves to stand in front of God's glory? Who deserves to be there in His presence? This just goes to show that they recognize that, and they recognize Him. As we move on down to the 2 that were covering their feet, this is possible that it's referring to their service of God, to God, their feet is the ones that would carry them to wherever they worked, or their feet were, the ones that went out. Those were the tools that they used to go out and that they used for the service to God. And also, as you see, along with the feet, the 2 that they flew with, these kind of refers to the ongoing activity of to and for God. As we move along into verses 3 and 4, we see the Lord's holiness and His presence. See, holy, 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 repeated 3 times. Now, most often through the Old Testament, you see things repeated, or you see things put in numerical order, and you see, there being reasons for a specific number. Well, whenever it comes to 3, it talks about how showing all-powerful or complete holiness. So we see that, as it not really pertaining to the Trinity, but just as the holy, holy, holy repeated 3 times, just kind of emphasizes it more. We see the post of the door. Now, this post of the door was kind of referred to as very large foundational pillars. Those that you'd see on your front porch or something. Those big pillars holding up your roof. And no doubt in the temple, they were very, very large. They were crucial to that foundation and to holding up that building. But the shaking of them just point to His presence and His power. Just the strength it takes to shake those or to move those pillars. And as we see the smoke that filled the temple, this can probably be taken as kind of like in Exodus chapter 13, I believe. Exodus 13:21, whenever they're in the wilderness and that cloud of smoke. Just His presence is applicable there. This smoke is about the same type of smoke, just to show His presence and glory. So now that we've seen and taken a look at Isaiah and his vision, but it's one thing to receive one thing, but then it's another thing to act on it. So let's see what Isaiah does here as he responds to his vision. In verses 5 through 7, we see the prophet's cleansing. Verses 5 through 7, the prophet's cleansing. So I said, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a live coal, which he had taken with the tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it and said, "Behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity is taken away, and your sin purged." As if we go back up there to verse chapter 5, when he's pronouncing the woe unto himself, he goes on to pronounce woes to nations, but here he pronounces a woe to himself. And a woe, if we define it, really literally means a threat of judgment. So him saying, "Woe is me," is him bringing himself down, but he now realizes that he's due to the same judgment as the nation is. He's not any better than they are, for whenever he says, "I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people with unclean lips." He's identifying himself as part of the nation, as a human man that has failed, and through that, subject to the same judgment as them. Now him, as he's pronouncing this, the seraphim comes and brings a coal. Now that live coal, that ember, you can't have a live coal without a fire. And so thus commentators say that this is from an altar of burnt offering.
I'm sorry, I made him.
Good morning. We're in Isaiah chapter 6 this morning. But this live coal, as it's brought from the altar of burnt offering, we see that the altar of burnt offering, yes, of course, is symbolic, does mean something. But also, I think it's a point to point out that of the fire that, and ultimately in the Old Testament, fire symbolizes purification. And also, as we move into the New Testament, we see that the fire is the one that brings out that dross from the silver. That dross is the impurities and all the nasty stuff that's in silver. But whenever it's heated up, whenever they're refining it, that heat brings out the dross to the top. They skim it off, and thus leaving pure silver. And so that's kind of the idea here, is that fire that takes away the dross is that live coal here. And in verse 7, whenever he touched his mouth with it. Now the mouth, this is a very, whenever I first read Isaiah 6, I kind of sat back and I thought, this is kind of, I didn't really know what was going on with this part. But through studying it and through reading commentaries, we see that the mouth is a very big part, especially whenever it comes to prophets. For this is, the part of the body that they use the most to go out and to prophesy and to tell the nations, to tell. Man, I'm sorry, guys. To tell the people and the nations of God and His glory. We can also kind of see this if we go to Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. And in verses 3 and 4, we see that these men, they had tongues of fire, kind of pointing at the Spirit giving them guidance, the Spirit giving them the words that they used to tell the people about God and His glory. Now we see that his iniquity is taken away and his sin is purged. Ultimately, the seraphim was telling Isaiah here that his inner corruption has been atoned for. There's no more needing to say that he is an unclean man of unclean lips, and he dwells in the midst of people with unclean lips. For here the seraphim is touching him on the lips with the live coal, that fire symbolizing purification. And he's telling him that, hey, your iniquities are atoned for. They're covered. And so we see that, Isaiah's answer, or Isaiah's cleansing after we see Isaiah's vision. But now we move on to my third point, the prophet's commission, verses 8 through 12. Now the rest of the chapter really deals with Isaiah's message from the Lord, and that he was to go and preach and proclaim to Judah. So, if someone will read for me verses 8 through 12.
Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand, keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, for their eyes heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return and be healed. And I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, the houses are without a man, the land is utterly desolate. For the Lord has removed men far away in the forsaken places, and many are in the midst of the land.
Thank you. Now, I know this is a Bible class, but, making sermons and things for classes, you really tend to see the application of some things. And here I would like to point out that the call came after he was cleansed. He couldn't be called, he couldn't fulfill anything for the Lord. He couldn't do anything righteous while he was unrighteous. The call came after he was cleansed. And just in the same way, we need to be sure that we are righteous, that we are upright, that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk, so we can go out there and so we can do good also. But we see, as we get back into the text, verses 8, God's question. God refers to us, that being the Holy Trinity there, but also he asks, who will go? Now, God's not, asking literally like he didn't know. Or, he's not saying that he was actually looking for someone in a crowd. He knew exactly who was going to go. He knew Isaiah. He was giving this call and this charge to Isaiah. But here he asked the question, who will go? Now, I think he did that for, giving Isaiah the opportunity to act on it, to be of service, to be that man. And as Isaiah says in the end of chapter 8, here I am, send me. Now also, here's a point of application. In 8, we see Isaiah's answer. Here I am, send me. What an answer, what an attitude. And as a Christian and as brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to have that same attitude. Jesus gives us the same charge today, and we need to have that attitude of, hey, here I am, send me. But continuing on in verses 9 and 10, we see that their hearts became fat, their ears heavy, and their eyes became shut. It's not that God would operate directly on them, but through Isaiah's declaring of God's word to them, their hearts would become hardened. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't understand what he was saying, and so they turned his back on him. They didn't want to hear it, and so if they would have seen it, if they would have heard it, if they would have understood it, then they would have been healed. They would have been saved by God for their sins. And that healing that we read in verse, 10? that's a spiritual healing. Although some, just like King Uzziah, though he's dead and passed on by now, but there's leprosy, there's illnesses. I mean, this was the world that they were living in. The same world that we live in today. But whenever he's referring to the word healed in verse 10, that's more of a spiritual healing. But as we see Isaiah's answer to God in verses 11 and 12, he said, "Lord, how long?" And he answered, "Until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant. The houses are without a man. The land is utterly desolate." In verse 11, he says, "How long? How long?" Isaiah was ready to speak, but he just wondered how long it would take for them, to listen to him. And this, it's discouraging whenever people don't listen to you. It's discouraging whenever you're continuing on and you're pressing hard and you have one goal in mind, but then you don't see that goal come to fruition, or you don't see any of the good fruit coming from that. So Isaiah is saying, how long do I have to do this? But the Lord told him to proclaim it until his judgment comes. And ultimately, we can see that through verse 11b and 12, he's referring there to the Babylonian exile to come just about 20 to 30 years later. Now, although Isaiah would not live this long to see the Babylonian exile, but the idea that God was telling him here was, preach it for the rest of your life. Go on and go out and preach the word that I give you until ultimately this day comes. Basically referring to the rest of his life. He's telling him to go out and to preach this. Verse 13, "But yet a tenth will be in it, and will return and be for consuming. As a terebinth tree or as an oak whose stump remains when it is cut down, so the holy seed shall be its stump." Thus, a one righteous nation, and thus through the Babylonian exile, judgment is going to come down on them and cut them down. And we see, all throughout the Bible, the Old Testament and the New, we know that God's judgment is out of love. God doesn't judge, in His anger or anything like that. And thus, whenever He does punish nations, more often than not, it's to correct them. It's to bring them back into a right relationship with Him. And we see that in these verses that, ultimately point to the Babylonian exile. Just a couple minutes left, but I want to leave y'all with a conclusion. That God doesn't have large numbers of people to accomplish His will. He doesn't have, all these big, strong armies. Sometimes He did. But more often than not, He just has a couple people like Isaiah. But the thing about God is that He treasures quality over quantity. Isaiah was willing. "Here I am, send me." He was willing, and so that's why God wanted him. Isaiah had a wonderful vision, a tremendous vision of the Lord. It caused him to realize his own sinful condition, as well as the sinful condition of the people. So he's cleansed, and and he's commissioned by God to take this message on. Although the majority refused God's word and would go into captivity, there would be a remnant who would be spared. So all through this, we see, the establishment of Isaiah and his authority to be a prophet. And if you continue reading on into Isaiah, we see that chapter 7, kind of refers to the Emmanuel prophecy, the prophecy of the great virgin birth. And just continuing on, Isaiah will, go out into the nation to proclaim God and to proclaim judgment upon the people. Of course, not all. Many, most of the people don't listen, but that doesn't stop Isaiah. Just like how today, we can go preach, we can go have Bible studies. Some may not listen, most might not listen, but that shouldn't stop us today. All right. That's all I have for y'all this morning. Thank y'all for your attention.